Hello, hi. So here we are again for another lecture. Very interesting one this time. In this lecture you can see there's three pictures on the slide. Three individuals. I want you to have a look and just make some deductions. When you see these pictures, what is it that you see? Take your time, have a look, make some assumptions, make some deductions. What do you see in this? Okay, so you've had a look. You now know from the name itself, you'll get to know that one person is a bodybuilder. The second person, the girl who's lying down and having a lot of weight on the bench press, is a power lifter. And the gentleman who's got the weights up is a weightlifter. So now all of these, are they the same or are they different? Because obviously all of them are strong. They're definitely stronger than the average person out there. So are they the same? Can the first person who's got incredible muscle, you can see he's got a nice small waist, broad shoulders, pretty ripped. Can he also do the bench press and as much weight as the girl is doing? And that girl, can she do the lift which the other guy is doing, which is a weightlifting lift? And can that weightlifter, obviously you can see he's also got some muscle, his quadriceps are pretty well defined, his arms, his shoulders, if you see, are also pretty defined. But you can make out that his arms and the arms here, there's a different level of hypertrophy here, and there's a different level of hypertrophy here, the size, right? So if he wants, this person, can he build muscle like him if he just wants to train? Can this person end up doing a bench press like this girl or any other person of his own weight category, and maybe a man? Would he be able to do this? And this girl, will she be able to do this? So basically, can we interchange by doing different exercises? Can they just switch from being a bodybuilder to a weightlifter, and from a weightlifter to a powerlifter? What do you think? Let's get to this. Okay, so we'll be going into the differences between these three predominant styles which have traditionally existed of exercising. There's of course a lot more people who also do a mix of all these, some who do bodyweight training, but predominantly, and if we look at from a competitive point of view, some of the biggest competitions in the world, these are held under these three, you can say, disciplines. So what is bodybuilding, what is powerlifting, what is weightlifting? Let's delve straight into it in the next slide and let's try to find out what they are. So here we are with the bodybuilder. We can make out he's a very well defined guy. You can definitely see it's just like muscle, it's just like slabs of muscle on his body. How does he get those? Does he eat? Does he train? And that's what makes him this muscular. How come the weightlifter didn't have this level of muscle? Why isn't that a power lifter becomes this big? Does this guy lift more weights than the other? Let's get into it. Okay. So first, what is bodybuilding? Is it a sport which you see in the Olympics? Or is it a sport which exists at a different level? Or is it not a sport? Okay, what is it? Is there movement? Is there sort of something that is done to show that, hey, I'm better than this guy and I can do this more than the other? So what is it about bodybuilding? Bodybuilding is a very interesting sport. If we may call it a sport, it is sometimes also called a lifestyle. Because the whole idea behind bodybuilding is, as the name suggests, body building. The aim is to build muscles, and especially muscles which have a lot of hypertrophy, meaning these are large muscles. So the intention is to build big muscles. And when we think of the term bodybuilder itself, what comes to your mind? You think of a person, generally a guy who's like big chest, big arms, and sort of is a really sort of massive, lots of muscle, walks probably a bit like this. But that's what comes into our head, right? And that's because that's what we have seen over the years. We have seen in movies, Hollywood stars, bodybuilders who become actors, so many of them, right? So when we think bodybuilding, we think of a person who follows a certain lifestyle as well. What is that lifestyle? Bodybuilders are very much focused on their diet, on what they eat. And why is that so? It's because to be able to put on obviously so much muscle, you need to be having a good diet which has a large amount of protein, a good balance of carbohydrates, and also adequate fats. Now, this is something that athletes can learn from bodybuilders. The dieting part, when we look at the discipline that bodybuilders show about eating foods that they sometimes don't even like, and then sometimes avoiding foods that they actually like. The difference becomes that because of the requirement of the body to be in prime condition, they have a fixed plan, and just like in other sports how there's periodization, in bodybuilding there's pre-contest and then there's contest weight, and pre-contest and then off season they also have cycles where they sometimes bulk up and they know exactly when to get in shape. So the individual that we see here in this particular slide, you can make out, like I said, nice tiny waist. Look at the shoulder to waist ratio. It's definitely very good. The quadriceps definition, there's a good balance in muscles. You can see his gastrocnemius, his calves, the four heads of the quadriceps. You can literally see every muscle out there, right? The serratus anterior, the pecs are properly defined. Now, is this possible by just going to a gym, training and saying, hey, I train hard and that's how I ended up becoming this big? Is there effort in dieting? Like I said, of course, yes. Okay. So something that athletes can learn from is the discipline that bodybuilders have in following a diet, maintaining a regimented lifestyle. Because you cannot obviously get down to such bodies by just eating every second junk food out there on the street. So for those athletes specifically, especially who are into sports where there's weight categories, boxing, wrestling, weightlifting, where they have to get down under a certain weight and they have to get down without losing energy. There could be certain things that they can learn from bodybuilders, and there are certain things that they shouldn't learn. Now, what are the things that they shouldn't learn? Like I said, discipline is what they can learn. What they shouldn't learn is the unhealthy practices that a bodybuilder might follow to get a body of this standard. And what are those unhealthy practices? One becomes the fact that a lot of bodybuilders just before competition will cut down on their sodium. And the reason for cutting down on their sodium intake is that the water retention in the body is lower. So when they get into competition, they look more shredded, okay, meaning every muscle is seen. Now what this does though is they have a lot of other issues sometimes, right from feeling weak, getting muscle cramps, sometimes even while doing those bodybuilding poses, even passing out because of the amount of dehydration that they're going through. So in this particular case, if we see the bodybuilder who's posing, is this how he'll look all the time throughout the year? What do you think? Obviously no. This type of body is something that they peak for. So just like how we work with athletes and peak for a certain competition, bodybuilders tend to peak at a certain time to look their best. And to look their best, are they at their healthiest at that moment? No. So to be able to look like this, okay, to have such big muscles and to have such low amount of fats is not natural, if we might put it. Is it healthy? No. But this is something they achieve through dieting, through exercising, and through a lot of other means which we'll get through in the future. But this is something we need to understand, that to build a body of this standard, there is work that goes in, okay, and we can learn from different lifestyles that are followed, and we can learn from them so that our athletes know what good to take, and then our athletes should also know what is not good. This is extremely important so that young boys, and this goes especially to young boys, sometimes they get very influenced when they see people with big muscles. A 16-year-old, an 18-year-old who's out there might look at somebody who's big, who's got these arms which are almost probably 18 inches, and for them it would be like, oh wow, bhaiya, iske arms dekho, kya arms hai yaar, kya shoulders hai, क्या body है sir इसकी. So young boys especially can get very mesmerized, with such bodies, without of course understanding the underlying factors and the underlying problems of this. So this is something we need to understand as strength coaches, especially strength coaches need to understand about bodybuilding. And why I say, though we might not use everything from bodybuilding in our training, but there will be some time or some place where you will get across while training in the gym somebody who's big, who's got amazing sort of muscle size. Your athletes might ask about, sir, इनकी body ऐसे कैसे बनी है, can I become this sort of big? अपनी भी body बनाओ sir उनकी तरह. So this is what athletes will ask, and it's very important that you are informed about this. And someone might say that, hey, but why should I be informed about bodybuilding? I'm not a bodybuilding coach. But the reason and the fact that you will be training in a gym, and within that gym, whatever happens, as a strength and conditioning coach, it's important that you need to know the different practices that take place in a gym, so that you're able to answer questions from especially young students about such topics. Because if you have no clue about what is bodybuilding, or what is it about building muscle, what is it about building muscle size versus building strength versus building power, if you are not able to answer, sometimes students can just assume that maybe that guy with the bigger muscles knows more than you. And fair play, to them. If you are not able to answer, this is how it works. Because our field as strength and conditioning coaches is one of those fields that we too do train, we do tend to have muscles, we are also pretty decently fit. But then if there's somebody else who's much bigger than you, who's got much more muscles than you, and who looks like, they can be very strong, but are they strong? Are they able to move efficiently? Is that body hindering their movements, or is that body enhancing their movements? These are answers which you need to have, and you need to have this in a non-biased manner. Sometimes some coaches, some strength coaches who themselves practice bodybuilding, and this is especially important for strength and conditioning coaches to know. If you're a coach, a strength and conditioning coach who has been practicing bodybuilding, that's your lifestyle, nothing wrong with it, that's good for you. If you follow extreme dieting, good for you. If you compete in a bodybuilding competition, great. But don't force your lifestyle, or don't influence your student to follow your lifestyle. This is extremely important for us to know, so that as coaches, we are not pushing a certain philosophy or a certain thought process or a narrative onto our students. What you do for your own fitness, for your own lifestyle, should be what is good for you and is what is required for you. The athlete who's training has to be doing what is good for them and is what is important for their particular sport. And like I've said right in the beginning, whatever they do with you physically is only to enhance their technical skills. If you like to build a body like this gentleman here, which is great, which is okay, nothing wrong if that's what you like, if that's your intention to be able to look muscular, and there's maybe certain things you do in order to get that body. Again, it's okay, but that should never cross, and that clarity, that distinction has to be there with us, that what I do, what my students do are two different things. Now in this I will give you one of the examples that over the years I have followed. I have been practicing kickboxing for many years. I've been fortunate to learn skills from different people, so almost from the age of 16 when I started, 16 or 15, till now, close to 35 years I've been practicing. And I've been pretty decent at it. I do love to, when I get time to really maintain that skill, because it's a skill to kick. When you do a side kick, you do a roundhouse, you do a spinning kick, it's a skill, right? Not every person can do that. Now I do this because it's a skill that I have managed over the years, and I will do it as long as I can, as long as my body stays safe as well. I make sure I don't overdo it. Now a lot of times, many students have asked me, when they see me practicing and they see me hitting the bags or doing the kicks, a 16-year-old, 18-year-old obviously would get very impressed. For them it's like, wow, this is so cool. Sir, our coach know such cool moves, and they do get impressed. Over the years, now so many years, decades, people have asked me to train them, students especially. Those who are into sport, I have not taught even one person how to punch, how to kick. Now one might say, why? It's simply because it's not required for their sport. In fact, if I end up teaching them, let's say I end up teaching them how to box, how to punch according to what I know, how to kick according to what I do, the impact on their joints, especially if it's somebody who's, say, a table tennis player, a badminton player for whom wrist work is so important, and they are not used to this load, they are not used to their fist connecting and taking impact, it might actually be counterproductive. And this is something we need to understand. What we do is okay for you. It's something you've mastered over a period of time. Even if your athlete is impressed and wants to do that, you have to ask yourself, can they do it? And then the question is, should they do it? So extremely important to know this, so that you don't get into a situation where you have made your athletes do something which over time you are sorry for and even they are sorry for. And this is where again comes a bit of that professional side, like what are you hired for? If I have to ask myself when students come to me, do they pay the fees to learn kickboxing from me, or do they come there to do strength and conditioning for their particular sport? So these are questions which are very you have to ask yourself. These are rhetorical questions sometimes, you have to ask a question which has a question and an answer in it itself. So bodybuilding, for those who do, and a lot of gentlemen, especially guys, and sometimes even girls, they love to train, they love to have a good body, they love to maybe pose, put up some pictures on social media. That is for you. What you do in the gym and what you teach in the gym are two different things. You can practice and you can be fit, but what you do, if you like to maybe do Olympic lifting, if you like to do heavy powerlifting, you like to do martial arts, or you're somebody who's very keen on doing long distance running, that's your lifestyle. And even there, of course, right in the first lecture, in one of the first ones, we have discussed about fitness. You have to ask yourself, your own training, are you doing fitness training, or are you doing generic training, or just training based on one element, which is maybe about just having good body composition. So whatever you do, make sure, especially if you're a bodybuilder who trains, it is great, it's a good lifestyle which has discipline, which has dieting, which has focus. You have to give in time to maintain that body, but that doesn't mean one has to show it and push it to the students. Same goes with those who practice martial arts. If you practice martial arts and you do kickboxing, you like to hit the bag, this is what I love to. It's a great way for me to test my own power, but that does not mean I have to teach that to a student. So don't force your philosophies or your thought processes on your students. Okay, this is extremely important, and especially I think more with men, because bodybuilding is more a predominantly male activity, and generally most youngsters, especially teenage boys, will get impressed at some stage or the other with a massive bodybuilder who's there. They would, because it's one of those things, where you associate muscles with strength. Of course, when you're into the knowledge part, then you know that not muscles itself being big does not mean they are strong and they are powerful. They might not have speed, but it doesn't matter. If a person likes to build a body where they are moderately strong and at the same time they prefer that look, it is great. But as I keep repeating, it does not mean that has to flow onto the student. Know what you do, keep it to yourself. Don't force it onto a student knowingly or even unknowingly. And even if they ask you for help, saying that I would want this, you have to really know and ask yourself, why am I hired here? What is my contractual agreement with this player? I'm here to do SNC, or am I here to do bodybuilding, or am I here to do martial arts or long distance running, or anything that you like. Okay. So these are questions which we have to ask ourselves first, and sometimes even if you don't practice that particular activity, so somebody might like to do long distance running, but that long distance runner should have an idea about bodybuilding, because as a SNC coach, the gym is your office and you need to know what happens in a gym. What you do, absolutely you need to know. What others around you do, also you have to know. And same goes with somebody who's maybe doing bodybuilding. He needs to know if somebody is a long distance runner and they come to the gym and they maybe run on a treadmill for long to practice, or they do certain moves. The bodybuilding guy also has to know what happens if that bodybuilding coach is a strength and conditioning coach. Same again goes with somebody who's into martial arts. Okay, if they're practicing martial arts, does not mean they have to hate bodybuilding or they have to hate weightlifting. You have to have knowledge of everything, because in your office, what happens, even if it's not your job, you need to be knowing. That just makes you more efficient. So do get knowledge about bodybuilding, and we're going to give you a bit more. Now, this is a non-Olympic sport. So bodybuilding is not an Olympic sport. It's not in the Olympics. And sometimes there's a lot of debate about, is it a lifestyle or is it a sport? Because if it's a lifestyle, then it's something where you live, and definitely it's a lifestyle. It's about training, maintaining good health, looking good. Why it is sometimes the people who oppose bodybuilding and who have kind of over the years said that it's not a sport is because one of the reasons they say is that the sport is something which is about display. You get on a stage and you display your muscles. So what many people, those who are pro, those who are against it, sometimes they say that there's no movement, there's no performance. Like a body might look very good on stage, but what is it that they do with that body? So this is some of the arguments that some people put. Now we as strength and conditioning coaches, and this we have to be very clear, you should never be pro for anything, nor you should be against it. You need to have a neutral approach towards different things that are done in a gym. Okay, don't hate something, don't love something, but do be aware of all the things that are happening around you. So like I said, those who say that bodybuilding is not really a sport and why it has been finding it hard to get into Olympics or many major sports events or organizations is the fact that there's no movement. So the belief is that if you have a body which looks strong, but you are not doing something to prove that you are stronger than the other guy around you. So if there's 5 bodybuilders on stage, the judgment is done by judges who sit and who look at the bodies, and then they assume and they judge that, okay, this person's waist is small, his shoulders are broad, his maybe legs are too thin or too big. Sometimes they look at proportion, but all this is not objective, it is subjective. So like they say, it all depends what's in the eyes of the judge. So sometimes it's like beauty, one might say something is beautiful, but it is a subjective statement. What is beautiful to one might not be beautiful to the other person. So bodybuilding judging is done like that, and that is the reason why it is sometimes not able to establish exactly why somebody wins, and there's a lot of times there's problems at bodybuilding competitions. So this is what we need to be aware of. Okay, what is done in a competition. So what is done in a competition? One, there are different body weight categories, like in wrestling, boxing, different body weight categories. The higher you go, obviously the guys become bigger. Okay, what do they do on stage? So there are mainly 7 compulsory poses. Okay, as you can see, one of them is this, what is called the front double bicep. Very common when we talk about strength. What do kids do? They'll say, no, I'm strong, so go out and do this. So that is one of the bodybuilding poses called front double biceps. Okay, there's something called front lat spread, where they keep their hand on the waist, put the elbow out. Okay, then on the side there's something called a side chest, where you lift the chest hold. So this is one. Then they turn around, and from there they'll do what's called a back double bicep. So same as the front one, but from this angle, so the back muscles are seen, assuming the judges are sitting there. Then they'll do what's called a back lat spread. So this is again what was done in front as well. Okay, so this is the 5th one. Okay, then they do something called the side tricep. okay, and side tricep is where they'll show this muscle, which is your tricep, hold this and pose, okay. And the next one they do is what's called the abdominal with thighs. So they'll get both their arms, one here, they'll flex those arms tight and of course have abs which are displayed, and they'll keep one leg in front or the other and keep showing the sides. So these are basically the display movements that they do. Sometimes some judges will ask them to do one more, which will be what's called an optional pose or what's called a most muscular. Again, a very sort of with kids and all these cartoon animations we sometimes see, somebody's angry, what do? They do this like, oh, I'm strong, I'm going to beat you. So that's pose. There's a pose which is called the most muscular. So this becomes the optional pose which is done. So this is how then they are judged. Now after this, then they get on and do generally a 1 minute posing round where they display their muscle by themselves through different poses. They'll pose one arm at a time or this and go on and so forth. So when these posings are done, then again the judges just look at that and they subjectively judge that, okay, this guy is good and this guy is not as good. And this becomes one of the, you can say, the challenging parts and the questionable parts. How does one decide? And unfortunately, there's really no answer. How can one say that this body is better than the other? Because there's no real sort of measurements done. It's not about measurements. One guy could have bigger arms, but the judges might think that though his arms are bigger, the other person's arms are much more defined. Sometimes it can be that your arms can be more defined, but the judges can think that, oh, these arms are defined, but they are not proportionate. The bicep is more developed than the tricep. Or sometimes, they can think that your chest is more developed than your legs. So there's a lot of variation. There's a lot of things that the judges can decide, as to what is right and what is wrong. So in a way, it's somewhat similar, you can say, to gymnastics, because even in gymnastics, there are judges who make subjective decisions, right, about the landing, especially in rhythmic gymnastics. Now then you might say, then why is this also not a sport if gymnastics can be? The difference is gymnastics has movements, and those movements are obviously much harder. They move at a certain speed, they flip, they toss, they do somersaults. So that becomes the part where there's movement, and this is what is believed that this is the difference between the two. That here there's no movement, and that's why it becomes a bit harder to know exactly what one has done, and that is why it's not considered a sport. And you can look at the definition of sport in the previous lectures where it is explained, and you'll also get a bit of an idea. So now the next thing, okay, 7 compulsory poses and then free posing that is done. What is the other thing that is done with bodybuilding? And this is what athletes can utilize. Bodybuilding repetition ranges. Though bodybuilders tend to be very big in size and look big, do they lift heavy weights and just go heavy with weights and do 3 or 5 repetitions? No, they tend to, the repetitions are generally higher, from 8 to even up to 15. Okay, very few bodybuilders out there in the past have been training heavy, and many of them have had quite a lot of injuries as well, very big names as well. So the repetition range is actually higher, but bodybuilders follow a specific principle which is called the continuous tension principle, where the muscle is constantly loaded. So if someone's doing a bicep curl, they would go up, go down, up, down. There's no pause in between. So what this does is constantly loads the muscle. Okay, there's no break. Instead of doing a continuous, if we do this, like what many people do, they lift, weight, lift, weight. That pause in between takes tension of the muscle, and lesser the tension of a muscle, you can obviously do more repetitions, but the muscle's quality, especially to tolerate lactic acid, is slightly lesser compared to somebody who constantly is putting stress on the muscle. And what do we want in a lot of sports, especially when we are looking at sport where we want to build endurance in the beginning? How do you build endurance? You want to keep sub-maximal load for a prolonged period of time. So this is one of those principles which becomes very handy when you're working on something where you want to build muscle endurance. Okay. Now, what if a person lifts very heavy and says that heavy lifting will get me bigger muscles. Is that true? If you go through the literature, you will find that it doesn't work like that. In fact, over the years, over the decades, bodybuilding has been known, and sometimes there's this misconception that a big muscular guy will be very strong. The big muscular guy can be strong, but need not be strong, and need not be strong as somebody else. So if you take two big muscular guys who are bodybuilders, there might be one guy who lifts very heavy, and there might be somebody else who doesn't lift as heavy but is equally big and maybe even better from a look point of view. So you have to understand that to become a bodybuilder, some bodybuilders lift heavy, and definitely heavier than the average person. There's no doubt that bodybuilders are stronger than the average person, but bodybuilders are not as strong as a power lifter, or not as explosive as a weightlifter. So this is what we need to understand. Okay, so in this now, the part about being strong, training and doing exercises, one has to understand here the whole idea is to look good, but we can still use some of their principles of training. The other principle is where they do partial reps. And what are partial reps? These are partial range reps. Okay, so if somebody is doing biceps, one more thing that bodybuilding training does, and there's of course various others, there's acculsion training which is nowadays done where people put a band and then do lifting, so that there's some amount of blood restriction, and research has shown that it's pretty good for hypertrophy. But anyways, coming back to the main thing, so something else that is done in bodybuilding is where they do partial range training, where you lift and then you take the dumbbells only till here. Okay, you definitely don't go full range. And why is it done again? To keep constant tension. So from a size point of view, a muscle will grow much bigger if it is constantly stressed, where there's no break, where there's no halt. So a lot of movements, even bench presses, when they are done, you might see somebody holding barbell or dumbbells and then doing movements which are just here, so that there's constant tension on those muscle fibers. The same could be applied to even shoulder presses. They go till around here and this. Now this is great for hypertrophy, but this is something where maybe we should not take this point for athletes, because one of the drawbacks of this, and which we have spoken in the previous lectures, is about range. You don't want to lose range. You don't want to be strong only in the inner range and not to be strong in the outer range, because an athlete needs a body which is strong across ranges. Okay, it needs to be strong here and here as well. Okay, you don't want an athlete who's only strong here or only here. So yes, those short range movements may be not the best. It might be great for somebody who wants to purely put muscle and is good with that. Okay, but for an athlete it doesn't make sense. Coming to the last point about bodybuilding, so I've said that of course there are weight categories. These are weight categories in general competitions, and then there are some competitions which are held under different organizations which have what's called height categories. So there the people who take part based on height. So there's a tall category, then there's a short, and I think there are various others where they all stand together of a certain height, and then irrespective of your weight, you compete against each other. Okay, but the biggest title that is out there, okay, like who is a champion in bodybuilding, or who is the biggest bodybuilder, if somebody has to say, the best bodybuilder in the world. So there's a competition called the Mr.Olympia. Okay, and the Mr.Olympia is what is called a professional title, and there's open category. So there's no weight categories. Generally, of course, most of the guys who take part are pretty big in that. You could say maybe some of the lowest weights would be around 90 or 95 kilos, and then there's just pretty big, and then they have like some incredibly big muscles, and at the same time not just big but also very, very cut and very well defined muscles. And that becomes one of the differences between a bodybuilding big guy versus somebody who might be a strongman competitor. A person who's big in bodybuilding will not just be big when they compete, but they'll also be very ripped. And that is one of the hallmarks of the sport, a big plus a person who's ripped. Like you can see in the picture, this gentleman who's there, now he would be pretty big, even if he wears a t-shirt and he walks around, we would be able to know that he's big. But when he takes his shirt out and to have this tiny waist, okay, that is what separates him. A lot of professionals who are into strongman competitions or powerlifters, you might find even powerlifters with such broad shoulders. But it is generally rare for especially the heavier categories to have a slim waist as well. Okay, so you'll notice even when you watch the Olympics or you watch any competitions, there'll be these big weightlifters who come, in the heavier categories, 90 kilos and stuff. They generally tend to have bigger waists, and bigger waists in other sports, which are of course stronger, also tend to help have a stronger core because the area is bigger. So when we look at intra-abdominal pressure that's created here, the waist is something that helps them when it's big in size and when there's a lot more muscle that can hold that load which you push overhead. But a bodybuilder on the other hand has a tiny waist, and that's why not necessary that this person will be as strong as a weightlifter, but he need not be. The competition, if he takes part, is not done for weight. So these are things we need to understand. Okay, we need to just know that competitions in different sports require different things, and like I said, you don't have to become a bodybuilder as a strength and conditioning coach. If you are doing it, fine. If you are not doing it, fine. But you have to be knowing about bodybuilding, because the fact that people in that very workplace where you go regularly, almost daily, there would be others training with these principles. You need to know what they're doing, because if your student asks you, you have to have an idea. You can't be in your own world thinking that I don't do this, I only do what I call sometimes functional training. And of course, there are some myths and some realities about functional training as well. So those will be clearing in some of the other lectures. But we cannot be just thinking that what I do in the gym, that's the only way, and everything else that is done is maybe wrong or I don't care. That shouldn't be an approach. That's not a good approach for any professional to have in any field. So make sure that you know about bodybuilding. It will help you a long way in addressing a lot of questions that your athletes put about hypertrophy or muscle building. Thank you.